Hello and welcome to a special Gardener's World, continuing our celebration of the gardening year in all of its glory. Today we have some new films featuring plant obsessions, inspiration to get your winter garden sparkling, and some jobs to get it ready for next spring. Coming up on today's programme, Adam plants up a container for winter interest and beyond.
Yeah, we've got something for the here and now, and we've invested a few bob, but none of this is lost. We can divide, we can propagate. It's just a starting point for these plants that are going to be in this garden for absolute years.
The history of our garden greenhouses is centuries old. Advolly reveals the enormous challenges the designers faced.
Thousands of glass panes, some even curved, an enormous span, all thanks to amazing new engineering.
We look forward to one of the shining lights of the new year.
If you were to make a short list of things that you should have in a garden, then snowdrops are the starting point, really. However big or small your garden may be, there's always room for more snowdrops.
And I'm in Devon, exploring a garden that seems to rip up the rule book when it comes to planting. Innovative, surprising and clever, this is the perfect place to collect some ideas. This is Wildside Garden, and it's nestled on the edge of Dartmoor with really naturalistic planting that almost feels like you could be in a wild landscape. The garden itself is divided into three. So this is the lower garden, which is very undulating and filled with plants. Then there's the courtyard garden, which is more formal, but still very naturalistic in its planting style. And then finally at the top is the canyons, which is as dramatic as it sounds. Amazing topography. The ground has been built up nearly 8 metres above its original level to create these mounds. Other areas have been dug down deeper, creating lush pools. In the summer, the garden comes alive with colour, a tapestry of plants from every corner of the globe. And it's all put together with a real sense of artistry, crossing several continents within planting combinations. But it's the shapes and structures within the garden that really hold their own in the autumn and winter months. The lovely thing about this is that it works with nature, and yet it features some really beautiful species. After the riot of colour in the summer, sometimes our gardens can feel like slightly bleak places in the winter. But with carefully chosen plants, we can really bring some colour to the chillier months. Now Nick went to visit one garden that positively glows.
The light in a winter garden has an almost magical quality. Hanging low in the sky, it illuminates a garden in a completely different way to the bright summer sun. However, in the darkest months, we get fewer than 8 hours of it a day.
But in this garden, every minute of light is captured to create a space which shines even in the depths of winter.
Kathy Brown and her husband Simon have spent the last 40 years designing their Bedfordshire garden. With islands of flowing grasses, avenues of stark white trees and crisp topiary in every shape, creating a garden full of winter interest.
So what was your approach to this area of garden we're in at the moment?
I happened to see a painting by Monet in the Tate, and I was very close to it, and it's a very large painting, and I felt drawn into it. And there's a lot of gold in that painting. And I thought, the grasses look like this during the winter. It was partly the influence of Pete Aldorf, who had really shown us the way that the dyeing process can be as exciting as the flowering process.
The light's coming and going today beautifully and kind of illuminating these grass heads and other parts of the garden, and that's quite a significant part of your approach, right?
It's really crucial because if you can get the light behind such things as seed heads, and they're backlit and they're like torches, and I think that is just so wonderful, and it's free, isn't it? And when you get the sun on the white stem birches, they really glow, and you could have all the lighting effects in the world using electricity, but you'll never get this.
You can really see Kathy's eye for design playing out in this section of the garden. And the way Kathy has approached this design is all about the rhythm and repetition. So the birches repeat all the way through, but there's also the calamagrostis grass and the pampas grass, the cortaderia. And so they provide a lovely sort of contrast, but also a rhythm and repetition to the whole area. And then you get to this point, and what really works for me here is this teasel. And so with the contrast between the grasses, the birch, and the teasels, you've got this beautiful winter composition in lots of neutral tones. However, down here, there's a bit more colour. These dolly tubs are really cleverly planted. Essentially, what's in here are perennial and evergreen plants, which look great year-round, but they're having their peak right now. So at the front of the pot is this vinca, periwinkle. Most people think of it as ground cover, but it will trail beautifully out of the pot, and it gives you that sort of vibrant yellow. Next to it here is the hellebore. Of course, this foliage stays year-round, but right now it's in bloom, and it'll do that for 2 or 3 months. And this is part of the gold group. They're slightly different than most hellebores in as much as the flowers point out sideways, so they're that much more visible than the downturned forms. And then here is officially the longest flowering shrub in the UK. It's Viburnum tinus, and if you're lucky, it will bloom for about 6 months from autumn through to spring. So overall, this will look great all the way through the year, but it has its peak in the depths of winter. Large pots can be really superb for colour in the winter garden, but you can truly do it on a small scale by creating this traditional Japanese idea. It's called kokodama, and all they are simply is a sheet of moss, which you can get hold of from a florist or maybe from your own garden, and it's wrapped around the roots of, in this instance, some snowdrops, and then tied together. What's so handy about this is that you can lift any of your spring bulbs just as they start to emerge and treat them in this way. And of course, these can be moved around the garden, or, as I've done in the past, suspended with very fine fishing line to give you a fantastic effect. When it comes to colour in the middle of the winter, of course you don't just have to rely on flowers. There are endless plants with fabulous stems that are hardy and resist weather no matter what. Now, commonly people will go for a mass of cornus, a load of reds or a load of yellows planted in a block. But I think Kathy's genius here is mixing 2 different winter stem plants together. So this is cornus, and it's called midwinter fire. So it's yellow at the base, runs through oranges and through to red at the tip. And that's combined with this rubus, which is Rubus coburnianus. And it has these sort of burgundy stems at the top, and then they run down into this sort of blue-grey, ghostly-looking bloom, which I think is really, really beautiful. Now, both of them can be maintained just with hard prunes down to the ground in around about March time. And they'll re-emerge each year and give you this fabulous structure and colour through winter. Word of warning though, these rubus are really spiky. An absolutely key element for me when it comes to designing gardens is the idea of flirtation and revelation. And a sinuous path like this is great for that idea. In other words, there's something just beyond your view, and then eventually it gets to the moment of the revelation. And so here you've got this absolute mass, big swathe of sedum planted. And of course, it's now known as Heliotelephum. Fantastic plant for winter structure. But what makes it really special in the winter garden is it looks superb with the hoarfrost, And then when it snows, you get this lovely little cap of snow sitting on top. And I think the piece of design brilliance here for me is the contrast with the grasses in the background. So these miscanthus are absolutely vertical and they contrast fabulously against these absolutely horizontal tops of the sedum. Most of this garden is full of soft, sinuous lines and flowing grasses, but this is very much the formal area. What really works for me through here, instead of lots of the sort of heavy, dark evergreens, there's a real mix. And so you start with the taxus on the outside, which is a heavier green, but then you come in and you've got the Italian cypresses in that more limey tone, and then the lavenders. So they've all got that strong form that holds year round. So the combination of all of these elements works beautifully together and gives a garden which is going to look good all year round. Kathy, it's been glorious to spend the day in the garden, and just as the sun's setting over in the distance there, you've got these fabulous kind of illuminated wands of the miscanthus.
So in this moment, when you do get this sun and the low light of winter is really superb, people forget the winter as a garden, but I think it's really important.
I mean, I have to say, just sitting in the garden now, sun slowly dropping, the birds almost sound like it's spring. They're pretty happy to be here, and I have to say I am too. It's just a very tranquil space.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. That's one of the nicest things anybody could say.
Nick and Kathy are right, there is something incredibly special about winter light through grass seed heads, and you just can't capture it in any other way. The planting in this lower garden, that's really, really interesting, and especially the trees. There are so many trees. They're such a feature of this landscape, and the canopies have all been raised so you can see through them. You've got conifers and deciduous trees, and they create this undulating scene as well as the ground itself. And the underplanting beneath the trees is really dense. You have astrantia, there's primroses, there's solinums, there's a mixture of native and non-native planting all the way through. But then you get these views. So if you see through here, you can see the aces glowing red in the distance, and they just make you want to explore. Everywhere that you look, there's different views, and there's different paths that take you through those views as well. And as you go along them, you never quite know what you're going to find. This is the courtyard garden, and it has a really unique feeling, mainly because it's so open and it's so geometric. It's flat as well. It's the only place in Wildside that is. It's got concrete rectangular beds and cordon lines that run through all of them that create such structure. The planting has got some Mediterranean or hotter species in it. Amarine, that was bred here, which is a cross between amaryllis and a nerine. It's really amazing shock of pink in the middle of the beds. There's also eucomis, and they give a slightly different feel, but when you look closely, a lot of the species are just the same as the ones you find elsewhere in the garden, including even some conifers that have had their lower branches and their canopy raised. But in this flat, open space, it feels completely different from anywhere else. This is the canyon garden, and it's very free draining and very baked by the sun. So there's a different array of plants. There's a hillside of cistus, there's all different grasses, nephophias, and rather than the undulating mounds of the lower garden, here you have spikes of these grasses with pines and birch. So it almost looks like a heathland, but filled with colour and lovely species. And I think these three distinct areas of the garden all do feel very different, but they all have a real theme of exploration. Now we're off to Northamptonshire, to a garden that really delights in one of winter's greatest gifts.
if you were to make a short list of things that you should have in a garden, then snowdrops are the starting point, really. Once you get the snowdrops up, everything else seems to follow along quite quickly. The lift that they give you in the start of the year is such an important part of having them in a garden. I'm Darren Webster. I've been at Thenford House Gardens since 1996, and I'm head gardener and I manage the estate.
I am Emma Thick, the assistant head gardener, the resident snowdrop expert, and I help manage the collection.
We've been growing snowdrops since the mid-80s. Our aspiration is to be one of the leading collections shown in a garden setting within the country.
Since I've arrived, the collection has gone from sort of 250 to over 900. I'm quite a bad influence, or a good influence, depending on your point of view. So some of them are very subtle differences, and you do sort of need to get on your hands and knees to look at them. Others you can see from 2 or 3 metres away, and that's really what I like to see in a collection, is distinct snowdrops next to each other. This is Galanthus nivalis. This is the one you will find around churchyards, naturalised in woodlands, in your gardens. It will grow pretty much anywhere. I have seen it flowering underwater. And then we have Galanthus elwesii. It's another one you will come across in your garden centres. Big, broad, glaucous blue leaves. Tends to have quite a large flower. Can be anything from a single inner mark to a double to washed with green. One question I get asked every single year is, I have a snowdrop. It is a double. What is it? It is undoubtedly Galanthus nivalis florpleno, the double common snowdrop. The second thing I get shown every year is Leucojum vernum, which is a snowflake. This is var carpathicum, the yellow-tipped form. Tends to have very broad green leaves, a lot more leafy than your snowdrop, and that's closely related, but it's not a snowdrop, it's a snowflake.
However big or small your garden may be, there's always room for more snowdrops. We've got James Backhouse in this instance, with really nice long petals and markings on the inner, and the leaf colour works really well with the black Ophiopogum nigrescens. Once they've gone over, we'll give them a good feed, get the bulbs nice and healthy. It's a good way of bulking up the numbers, and then these are actually a much bigger group to then plant out in the gardens elsewhere. So whether you're doing it in 1 pot or 12 pots as we've got here, it's really a fun thing to do. There's probably a little bit of pressure when you get something that is quite rare and you may only have 1 bulb. We were recently given a newly named plant, and I think Emma's feeling great pressure to keep that going through to next year.
It isn't the only one, thankfully. I did ask the nurseryman because I was terrified it might be the only one in existence, and it would be like trying to care for the last dodo. I'm what they call a snowdrop immortal, which is a bizarre term that someone came up with for the people who have their full name with a snowdrop named after them, with the idea that you live on forever as your snowdrop. So, snowdrops are quite promiscuous. You can breed your own snowdrops. So here we've got Dryad Gold Medal, who is a lovely newish yellow variety. And this is Elwesii kryptonite, who is green washed and is early flowering. So with the hope that crossing these two is we will eventually get early flowering yellow snowdrops. First of all, take a flower apart so we can expose the female part of the flower. We strip off anything we do not require. And to avoid any cross-pollination, we're just going to rip off all the stamens as well. If you're doing this at home yourself, put your snowdrops in a pot, bring them into a warm room, because they need to be above 12 degrees for that pollen to start flowing. And the idea is you come along with some tin foil and you rapidly tap the flower, pretending you're a bee. Hopefully, the pollen will flow. So we're going to apply the pollen to the female part of the flower with my paintbrush. Boop, boop, boop. I can see the pollen is flying through the air, so job done. So just going to pop the mesh bag over the flower, and that's just going to prevent anybody else getting to it with any pollen. Within weeks, that receptacle is going to start to swell, and then the seeds will form inside, and hopefully in 4 or 5 years' time, we will have a yellow flowering version of kryptonite. Snowdrops are almost a natural thermometer. They will open up about 12.2 degrees, which is the temperature that bees start to forage at. And you can just see them flying around with their little pollen sacs full of pollen from snowdrops. So it's a vital resource, and everyone's got room for a snowdrop. Been doing this about 20 years. I have a whole community of friends I only really see in February. I suffer a bit with SAD, so seasonal affective disorder. So it's just a way of sort of getting me off my butt, outside, in the fresh air, enjoying the sunshine.
It's a funny thing about snowdrops, and Emma and Darren clearly epitomise this, that they can bring out a real obsession in people. But so many different things about gardening can. That's the lovely thing. Whatever it might be that appeals to you, gardening has the ability to really ignite a passion. This garden is certainly testament to that. It's been carefully sculpted with the sole aim to grow as many plants as possible. The really clever thing about creating undulations, if you're a plant lover, is it really maximises your opportunity to try different kinds of plants. So with each mound, you have a north-facing slope and a south-facing slope. So on the south-facing slope, you can have your bright sun lovers, and on the north-facing, things like ferns and real shade lovers. And it just doubles up your chance to explore the amazing world of plants in all kinds of different habitats. The landscape has been lovingly shaped over the last 20 years by Keith Wiley and his late wife, Ros. Keith, tell me about this garden. What was it before and how have you come to this?
We just bought a field. It was exactly the same as the field down the bottom there.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of plants. I didn't have any money, but we had masses of plants. So we re-landscaped it entirely, stripped the soil off the whole site and piled it up. And then you can actually match the plants to suit. So it's a question of right plant, right place.
Yeah, but you're making the places.
Yeah, you're playing God to start with, really. Yeah. So everything here is on a bank of some form. I remember as a kid when you can go into the fields of oxeye daisies and they're up by your chest and you're just immersed in flowers. And then when you go back as an adult and they're down by your knees, and it's not the same effect. So bringing the flowers up to your face, you feel involved with them. It's this emotional connection. That's what I get. That's what I try and do.
Would it be fair to say that trees are your favourite?
No, they are the bones, they are the structure that everything else hangs on. And especially in the winter, then when you have the flowers coming underneath, that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah, it is really stunning. How do you go about creating these tree shapes?
I mean, I just get a pair of secateurs and a saw and I'll come out and I'll shape something up. It's my favourite job. It lifts my spirit. What you're doing is you're taking the essence of the tree. You're not trying to turn it into something that it actually isn't. So you're opening up the centre of the plant and you're sort of very gently lifting the canopy. If you do it too quickly, it ends up looking like a lollipop.
The real skill with doing that is knowing when to stop, and you've obviously mastered that, because it's very easy to go too far, isn't it?
I think you're going to be very, very, very careful about it. If you're not sure, stop. Take crossing branches off first on the trees. And it's about the light too. See it at different times of the day. Wait until the sun is behind it and you can see the silhouette of the trunks, because that's what you're trying to create in effect. You're creating silhouettes all the way around. always seemed to me that when you're in the shade, looking out into the sun, if you can look through trunks that are silhouetted against the sun, that's magic.
And you're creating a habitat for yourself, but also so much habitat for other creatures as well.
Well, not only that, of course, by lifting the skirts, you're getting another habitat underneath the tree. Conifers nearly always have beautiful trunks. Yeah, so if you leave them with all the branches to the ground, just think of all the space you're wasting underneath.
I love your conifers, I have to say. As a plant nut, I walk around and I want to ask you what every single one of them is.
They are beautiful. They're really beautiful. Conifers just have such good bone structure.
They do. Now it's that time of year when all of our precious tender plants are snugly protected in the greenhouse from the cold. But do you know the history of where the greenhouse comes from? Advolly does.
Kew Gardens boasts a glorious array of huge glass houses, from the very new to the very old. The early structures appear a far cry from the small ones in our gardens. But actually, these buildings are the result of trial, error, and evolving technology, which has enabled us to have our own greenhouses. The history of glass houses truly began with the cultivation of citrus. From the 1600s, top European gardens grew orange and lemon trees in tubs to impress visitors. So soon, citrus and their containers arrived in the wealthiest gardens over here, and they needed looking after. Most gardeners in Britain would never have seen a lemon, let alone been to Italy. But somehow they had to keep them alive. And preferably fruiting. They were so valuable, woe betide you if you killed one. To keep citrus thriving in a British winter took great ingenuity. In Europe, the plants were moved into sheds or wooden frames, often with shutters covering windows. It's where the term greenhouse comes from, a place to overwinter your evergreens. Once the plants were indoors, they needed warmth, which was difficult. Stoves were smoky and often gave patchy heat, so extreme measures were rolled out. Some gardens employed small boys to drag red-hot braziers through the greenhouses. They did it to spread the heat. Can you imagine? By the mid-1700s, things had got a lot grander. Growing citrus became a symbol of wealth, and freestanding orangeries appeared in prestigious gardens, purpose-built for the fruit and visitors. This beautiful building was created by Sir William Chambers. It's made of brick with lots of glass. It's incredibly impressive. It's now a smart cafe, but then, like many orangeries at the time, it was actually a case of form over function. Although the windows are huge, crucially, the roof was tiled and not glass. So it looks lovely, but citrus never actually thrived because it wasn't light enough. It wasn't just the lack of horticultural knowledge that prompted a solid roof. Glassmaking was a relatively new industry and had many issues. Early panes were small and held by lead or wood which rotted, and bigger panes were very fragile. But there was more. Cracking glass was tricky and expensive because glass was taxed. It was a great way of taxing the wealthy because only they could afford it. But then, the use of cast iron combined with the abolition of the glass tax made a very big difference. This incredible palm house was built like the upturned hull of a ship with iron ribs. It would have been a wonder when it opened in 1848. Thousands of glass panes, some even curved. An enormous span, all thanks to amazing new engineering. Although the panes were big, the original ones were notoriously uneven, and there were fears that lumps in the glass would act like magnifying glasses, scorching the plants. After much debate, it was decided that the palm house glass should be green and not clear, and it was like that for nearly 30 years. The green glass let in enough light until the thick London smog made it an issue, so clear glass gradually replaced it. The palm house heating was a happier story. Here, hot water flowed through pipes and under grating, giving all-round warmth. And in 1854, the head gardener started taking plants out of their pots and putting them in beds to give them more room. Some plants flowered here for the first time, and 2 trees got so tall they had to be felled. New technology now meant that bespoke glass houses could be built, like the water lily house. With a huge shallow pond, it was created for the giant water lilies that arrived from South America, all needing to be kept alive. And in each specialist glasshouse, the gardeners had to discover the exact conditions for these new and exotic plants. It involved great ingenuity that still goes on here today. But back in 1863, with engineering marching forwards, this masterpiece of Victorian architecture opened, the Temperate House. Now glass houses were effortlessly huge. This covers almost 1.5 acres, a sea of glass and first-rate ventilation. It's packed with plants from temperate regions, and some plants are the original specimens that arrived more than 150 years ago. Many are rare and several are endangered in their native habitats. This is Encephalatos woodii. Only one specimen has been found growing in the wild, and this tree came from that plant. It's amazing, but also heartbreaking in equal measure. The creators of this glass house probably had no idea how important it would become. But seeing the plants in situ encouraged Victorian visitors to buy their own greenhouses. And by the 1900s, companies were making them in all shapes and sizes. The story of glass in gardens is full of cracks, mistakes, but fundamentally hard graft. So we must thank those designers, innovators, engineers, and gardeners who paved the way for our greenhouses today.
It's very easy to take for granted all of that amazing innovation, and we're so used to standing in another world inside a glass house. So it's amazing to see where that's come from and give it the respect it really deserves. There's plenty to catch the eye here too. You wouldn't necessarily know that wisteria is in the pea family, but when you look at these pods, you can see clearly that it is. Aren't they incredible? Lovely and velvety. And they're hanging all over from these, which shows it's been a good year producing them. They won't do this every year, but they're gorgeous. But I've never seen wisteria grown in this way before. They're almost like bonsais. And to get them to do this, you would need a pretty hefty stake before it produces this woody material and can support its own weight. But it's so unusual. And then regular pruning will hopefully keep this in this shape. Now, generally with wisteria, you prune it in about July time, take off all the big long tendrils, and then give it a really hard prune in January. And this just shows you how hard you can prune it and still get the flowers. I imagine this takes a lot of work, but if you had a small garden, you could just have one of these or a few of them. They look amazing en masse actually, this rounded form, especially with all the incredible trees behind that really echo that shape. It just looks spectacular, I think. Still to come on today's programme, Adam and Ash tackle some New Year jobs.
Start thinking about the veg garden. Here, I've got some seed potatoes. These are red Duke of Yorks. I'm treating these as an early potato. If you think about it, we have earlies, we have second earlies, and then we have main crop. This is the first lot to go in.
And we meet an enthusiast with a passion for one of the most fascinating plants, lithops.
They're completely different to anything else in the plant world. I look at one, then I look at the next one, and the next one, and I'm out there for hours on end.
I'm at Wildside, a garden in South Devon, not just made up of different rooms, but of different landscapes, shaped by horticultural visionary Keith Wiley. Creating this topography could have been a real nightmare if he'd hit rock, but he didn't. He hit this, which is called shillet, tiny little stones that run through the ground, and that means it's actually quite easy to dig out. So he's been able to create these big craters and then big mounds too. And that creates the ability to have right plant, right place. So in the deeper areas where it's boggy, water-loving plants, and then in the normal areas where there's a mixture of soil and rock, you can have your sort of more universal plants that can cope with a bit of both. But then also to create drier areas, this shillet can be mounded up, and then you have a perfect spot for Mediterranean plants. Now, all gardeners have these, whether it's a shady spot or a dry spot or a windy spot, even lots of the same. Within one garden, you'll have different areas for different kinds of plants. What I love about this especially is this bare wall has given the opportunity for some solitary bees and some big spiders to live. Now, one group of plants that really needs good drainage is succulents. And in Portishead, there is a man whose world has been rocked by one particular species.
They're completely different to anything else in the plant world. I look at one, then I look at the next one, and the next one, and I'm out there for hours on end. My name's Tony Irons. I'm a big fan of cacti and succulents. I particularly enjoy lithops. They're known as living stones. A lithop is a stemless succulent. They are a mesembryanthemum. These plants grow in arid areas in South Africa and Namibia, just basically as a pair of leaves in the soil, which store any water or moisture they're able to retain. They've adapted to their environment by mimicking stones so that goats can't graze on them. Probably got 100, 150 different varieties of species and cultivars. Different colours, markings, sizes, but I love them all. Welcome to my greenhouse. Here's my collection of cacti, succulents and lithop plants. This one here is a lithops jesinae. It would have started up as a single-headed plant, and as they grow through the years, the one head goes to 2 heads, 3 heads, until it forms a mound. The whole surface is called a window, and the sunlight goes through the window down into the plant to help with photosynthesis. When I was a youngster, I had a lot of interests and hobbies. I tried car spotting, train spotting, astrology, archaeology, and then a friend said he'd join a cactus club. And I went away as a 15-year-old boy with a little bag of 30 cuttings, and it took off from there. That's one of my favourites. It's a cultivar called Zorro, because the slash marks look like the end of Zorro's sword. And really, there's no other lithop mark like that. Right, there's another one here, which I particularly like. Generally, lithops flowers are yellow or white, but this one is a cultivar called Rose of Texas. It's got a very pitted surface. It's a smaller growing plant. I find it's a bit harder than some of the other lithops to grow, but the stunning factor is when it flowers, it's an orange-pink flower. No other lithops has got that colour flower, and it's so attractive. Let me show you another one. It's called ironstone. I named it because I helped propagate it. Round the face, you've got a lovely orange glow, a bit like the sun coming out, bursting out. I absolutely love seed growing as well. And if I can expand the seed available for lithops, that's what I do. It's very important because nowadays there's so much pilfering from the wild, and some of the plants don't even exist in habitat now. I'm going to get hold of the stigma and take off the pollen from one. Do it very gently. Some pollen on there, which I'm now going to transfer to the same species of lithops, just like a bee does, going from one plant to the other. And that will hopefully pollinate and produce a seed capsule which I can pick the following year to sow my own seed. Oh, look at that. That wasn't in bud this morning. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 buds have appeared just in the day. When I see them flower, it's usually a surprise. I'm walking along and all of a sudden there's a new flower. I grab hold of it, take it indoors, and I say to my wife, look, flowering.
Is she excited by it?
No, she's not. She can't stand cacti succulents. She can't. Tender neglect is the phrase I use. They love that. With lithops, you don't water from October till May because they just turn to mush. I think it's very important with any cacti succulents that you pass your knowledge on, and these arid plants are endangered, and if we've got them in collections here, it's down to us to make certain they carry on by growing seed, by taking cuttings, to encourage other people to come into growing them and into the horticultural industry. The more knowledge that can be passed on, the better. I like to help out at Elm Tree Farm, which caters for adults and youngsters with disabilities. They give encouragement to lots of people to learn horticulture and associated activities. So I like to help out with people like Louis, who's blind, and he's got a passion for cacti and succulents. Now our job today is to pot up these cuttings. So if you get one of the pots from your left-hand side...
Yeah, I can do that, Tony, for you.
Bring it over to the workstation and you can start filling the soil with the spoon into it.
I like working here, love working here.
That's good, look. 2 shoots with roots attached already.
Yeah, roots attached. It feels like grass, doesn't it?
It does, it's very dry. You'd like me to perhaps give you a cold hardy cactus?
Yes, please. I'll be good, won't it?
It will, yes, yes.
So I can do a bit of work at home, can't I?
That's it, yes, yeah. We laugh and joke about things. We've got our own different ways of potting up and own techniques, and he's picked up a few of mine. Right, we'll put this one aside that we've done.
Yeah.
And now guess what, Louis?
What?
We've only got 12 more to do.
Yeah.
Do you think we can manage to do that?
Yeah, we can manage, Tony. Of course we can. Woohoo!
Hey! It's all very well having books, it's all very well seeing it on the internet and on television, but it's a practical thing that people need. And to sit down with a person, to touch the plants and the soil and the pots is the way to do it. In a small way, if I can encourage people to carry on the interest, that's marvellous.
Tony's passion for lithops is really lovely, and it's great that he's using that passion to conserve different species, which is also doing nature a great service. Here in the courtyard garden, I'm going to do a little bit of cutting back, but Keith has a very specific way of doing that here. He lets nature really do its thing and plants seed themselves through the borders, and then he just edits them when they're not working. So it might be that something is obscuring a view, which is obviously so important here, to be able to get glimpses of the views beyond the beds. Or it might be that something's gone over and it's just not looking its best anymore. So I'm just gonna carefully, slowly remove some things, keep stepping back and make sure it's perfect, and then stop. So I think definitely these thalictrums will come out. There's some old lilies that have gone over there as well. It's just a case of being careful and slow and considered. Right, going. You can see all of these thalictrums have gone over, the flowers are finished, but there's lovely fresh growth around the base, so it's just removing these old flower stems that will open up that view behind me. But then not yet removing all the old seed heads because they have some beauty in them as well. I'll step back and look, and they might come out or they might not, but it's just being very careful and mindful and pausing and thinking before each cut and each decision. You have to be so careful where you put your feet here. Everywhere there's a seedling. I think that looks so much nicer. It's not too different, but you can now see the little undulating mounds of silvery foliage and the path between them. I've taken all the thalictrum down, I've taken some Perovskia down, and I've taken a little group of old lily stems down, but left one. There it is, a little cluster by a beautiful piece of dead wood. And in my opinion, those verticals actually accentuate the wood. That's the beauty though, it's all in the eye of the beholder. Now, earlier in the year, Adam embraced the chill and got on with some gardening jobs that were very important, but very relaxed.
I think when it comes to winter, so many of us just retract, go indoors, put the heating on. But actually, on a cold, crisp, but bright day, there's something magical. You've got bulbs popping out the ground, cornus mass coming alive, doing its thing, catkins dancing and playing with the light. And I like just wrapping up wool, getting outside, and just spending a couple of hours pottering around. Look at this snowdrop. I'm not sure where it's come from, but that's the first year it's appeared. And sometimes the garden guides you. And that says, I need some friends, doesn't it? So what I want to do here is I'm going to mass this out with snowdrops. You approach it from lots of different areas. You come down from above. You've got this beautiful hues, that green to play against. So I'm going to plant this out with a big block of white. Snowdrops are a bulb that tend to work a lot better in the green. So what I mean by that is actually you're planting them while they're in growth. I don't really buy them, you know, September, October time and pop them in because the success rate is really poor. But what I do before I put them out in the garden and just divide it in half, little peat-free compost, and then just dress them off with just some sort of torn leaves really. If you imagine, you know, a woodland floor and the snowdrops popping up through, you can use anything really, it just finishes things off. Once I've done that, I give them a little water in, and then they go on the windowsill. So I come down in the morning, put the kettle on, and you can guarantee that they will supply a smile for about 4 or 5 weeks. Once they finish flowering, then they'll go out in the garden. Not sure that was a very good idea, going inside. Why is it you come back out and it's slightly shivery? But we push on. So, start thinking about the veg garden. Here, I've got some seed potatoes. These are red Duke of York. So I'm treating these as an early potato. If you think about it, we have earlies, we have second earlies, and then we have main crop. This is the first lot to go in. So what I'm going to do here is chit the potatoes. So yeah, what is chitting the potatoes? Pick the potato up, have a look round, and you'll see there's a series of eyes. And somewhere on the potato, there'll be a stronger group. So what I've got here is the egg boxes. I'm just going to place those vertically. So eyes up, yeah? What'll happen is over the next few weeks, we'll get green shoots start to appear, but they'll be strong and they'll be stubby. So it means once these then go out into the ground, they'll get away really quickly. And these will be the potatoes that I start to lift probably in June. So there you go, potatoes chitted. Oh, come on in, boy. If I'm being realistic, I think it's going to take me a good few years to build up a real depth of winter interest. But that does not mean that I cannot have something for the here and now. Because on a lovely warm day, I come up here with my old mate there. It'd be wonderful just to have a winter pot that we can both sit and enjoy. So what I've got myself is this old bath. I've drilled some holes in the bottom of it. I've put some gravel in and I filled up with compost. So the mix that I've created is 3 parts peat-free compost, 1 part horticultural grit, and then 1 part soil. I've put the soil in really because every plant I'm going to put in here is hardy, more long-term, and it will just give it more sort of body in the mix for the roots to work into. They are all quite woodlandy, but the winter sun, it never provides that much heat that's going to damage any of these. And by the time it's up there in some warmth, I'll have moved this into a shady spot. So the first thing I've got is a carex, and this is ice dance. And this now gives me a really good sort of pivot point to start to build the rest of the pot around. Now I've got these, look, and this hellebore, so this is Niger. Get those in. Look at that root system. And again with this carex, what'll happen, it will sort of fill out and eventually outgrow this pot. More or less grows in clumps. So I could separate that really easily, put it in other pots, or even take it out into the garden. If you look at that gloss and the shape of that leaf, works really well against that carex. Now we're going to start to add a little bit of texture. First of all, we've got Polysticum, beautiful little evergreen fern. I'm just going to work that into there. That works well there. Now we've got Hart's Tongue fern, which is native. And what's nice, different leaf shape, but actually there's a limey finish which sits really nicely with the carex. And then we've got this polypodium, Tophill. It's constantly sort of placing something, repeating it, just moving the eye around this container. It's more or less tapestry in its feel, you know, there's texture, interest, but it's all about that detail. Once those flowers are finished as well on the hellebores, that seed will just start to drop into the gravel. So yeah, we've got something for the here and now, and we've invested a few bob, but none of this is lost. We can divide, we can propagate. So this really is just a starting point for these plants that are going to be in this garden for absolute years. So, there you go. Ash, what do you think, mate? He's not impressed, is he? Anyway, I think it's beautiful, and I'm sure that we'll spend a moment or two over a coffee enjoying it.
Adam's so right, that if you like being outside, there's always something you can do in the garden, no matter what the time of year. But the great thing about winter jobs is there's never quite the pressure of what there is in the spring and summer, so you can actually relax and enjoy those jobs. Take the time to look around, smell the smells, hear the sounds, and make the most of those few sunny days we get in the winter. Another really good job for the dormant season is adding a mulch to the soil. Now, a mulch will help to retain water, which is incredibly useful underneath trees that take up a lot of moisture, and it will keep weeds down. So this area has been weeded already, so by just adding a layer of, this is leaf mould, to the surface, you'll hopefully prevent more weeds from germinating, give it a feed, and help the ground to retain moisture. Now, this area is actually a spring bulb area. A few of them are beginning to show up, but not many. And the idea is to get this down before we have too many, and do it with care, rather than just throwing it on the ground. Actually, by hand balling it around the base of these plants delicately, you'll be feeding the plants, and you won't be covering them in leaf mould as you do it. Leaf mould is such a lovely thing. It's free to make, you can collect your leaves, and it takes a couple of years to break down, but once it does, it's this beautiful substance. It's teeming with life, and you can really improve your soil health by adding all of these microbes and creatures. And this blank canvas really gets you excited for the new year and the year ahead. It's there, and it's all ready just to become greener as the year goes on. That's all for this year, but Monty will be back at Longmeadow in spring. Until then, have a very happy new year.